Well, the storm that hit Europe Monday with gusts of 120-mile-per-hour winds was called St. Jude after the patron saint of lost causes. The strongest storm in decades has killed at least 13 people. The storm slashed through London with hurricane-force winds, toppling trees and twisting giant cranes. The high winds forced airports to close, shut down ferries, and even closed the tunnel under the channel between the UK and the mainland. The storm moved east to pound nations along the North and Baltic Seas, flooding lowlands, closing ports, and shutting down German autobahns, where there have been 6 deaths. And a year after Superstorm Sandy hit the eastern coast of the United States, much of the western and central part of the country are under weather warnings Monday because of a system moving across the country. Several low-pressure systems are converging, causing winds strong enough to topple semi-tractor trailer rigs on California highways and shutting down the airport in Las Vegas. Snow warnings are up for the high plains, while severe weather is predicted in the lower plains. And Superstorm Sandy claimed at least 182 lives and $65 billion in damage. After Hurricane Katrina, it stands as the second costliest weather disaster in American history. New York City communities like the Rockaways were left in tatters. Lawrence Matthew Leger brings us up to date.
A sweet smell fills the air at the Madeleine Chocolate Factory in Far Rockaway, New York, where workers are busy getting foiled favorites ready for the holiday season. What's sweeter is that some of them are back at work for the first time in nearly a year. The factory was badly damaged in the wake of Superstorm Sandy, which battered the eastern coast of New York and New Jersey last October.
Well, it's good to get back to work, thank God, because a lot of people don't have jobs.
Before the storm, 450 employees churned out an average of 100,000 pounds of chocolate every day. But when seawaters flooded their facilities during peak season last October, Madeleine lost more than $8 million in inventory.
All of a sudden, everything was destroyed.
All over the Rockaways, recovery has come in fits and starts. Despite the ongoing repairs, countless homes sit vacant. The popular boardwalk, once a hub of community life here, has yet to be fully rebuilt. Even some crucial grocery stores are still shuttered. Reverend Les Mullings, whose church acted as a base for first responders after the storm, says help is still needed in this community, where many live below the poverty line. The church stores canned goods and warm clothes, which are still being handed out twice a week. However, Reverend Mullings thinks Sandy's ripple effects are not all bad.
Even though we were hit very hard, well, we will rise and we will get help because there's help available.
And help has also arrived in the form of accessible medical care. The Doctors of the World charity just opened a free clinic for uninsured residents.
The other thing that really has emerged, though, at this point since Sandy is mental health complications, things such as post-traumatic stress, anxiety, depression. And this is why we've partnered with the Visiting Nurse Service to provide free mental health interventions for these types of conditions.
And Madeleine, the largest employer in the Rockaways, a third of its production lines are back up and running. The family-owned company just rehired 120 employees and hopes to get all their workers back within a year. An appetizing thought for a community trying hard to recover from Hurricane Sandy.
U.S. meteorologists say the storm was Godzilla-like when it came ashore, packing winds with the energy of 5 Hiroshima atomic bombs. For an in-depth look at what scientists learned in the aftermath, David Robinson is with the New Jersey State. He is a New Jersey State climatologist, and he's also a professor at Rutgers University. He joins us via Skype from Piscataway, New Jersey. Hi, thank you so much for being with us, David.
My pleasure.
Well, I remember us talking a lot about this, particularly in the latter part of the year after Superstorm Sandy, of sort of this perfect storm of all the conditions that came together to create this big, as we called it, Godzilla-like storm. Review for us the conditions that led to a storm so ferocious and so large.
Yeah, it truly was a monster. It was this combination of Hurricane Sandy, which came out of the Caribbean across Cuba and the Bahamas and up the East Coast, and a developing nor'easter here in the mid-Atlantic states. Now, oftentimes you'd see that happen and it would head out to sea. Unusual as it would be, for a late season hurricane to merge with this nor'easter. But there's what we call a blocking high in the North Atlantic. And it served as a barrier for the storm to move into the North Atlantic and instead helped to steer it towards the coastline, where it made a beeline and a perpendicular attack, if you will, on the shoreline of southern New Jersey. So it was this monster storm that was a hybrid of a tropical storm and a middle latitude nor'easter type storm. And it was steered in a very strange direction. So when it came ashore, it had tropical storm force winds for hundreds of miles in every direction. It had 3 feet of snow in the West Virginia Appalachians. There were storm warnings on Lake Michigan, severe thunderstorms warnings in Boston. It was this monster storm, and it took dead aim at New Jersey and the New York metropolitan area.
Was this a case, David, of bad timing with all of these conditions coming together at the same time, or was it a result of climate change?
No, it was this combination of bad timing. Adding insult to injury, the storm made landfall along the New Jersey coast at high tide. That added multiple feet to the storm surge. And also, sea level is a foot higher than it was a century ago, and that is due to human-induced climate change. So you can't separate out the natural and the human-caused effects. There's always a little bit of that human added energy from a warmer, moister atmosphere. But this is a storm that would have occurred without human intervention. What we did, we believe, is make a bad storm that much worse.
Yeah, and so much a part of how awful it was the size, right?
Yeah, it was enormous. It wasn't concentrated as some hurricanes are within 50 or 100 miles of its center. It extended its arms out hundreds of miles, which actually distributed the energy a little bit more, so you didn't have very heavy hurricane conditions. You had wind gusts up to 80 or 90 miles an hour and sustained winds, in most cases, just below hurricane force. But it was over such a broad area, and the way it attacked the coast perpendicularly, it allowed for a wall of water to just be pushed towards the New Jersey coast, down Long Island Sound, up New York Harbor. And that's what made the situation, for what it was about as bad as you could get, given a full moon, a high tide, rising sea level, and the angle at which it approached the coast.
I know that meteorologists, climatologists have been studying this feverishly since it happened. What's been learned looking back and analyzing all the data that was collected from it?
Good question, and that analysis is still underway. There'll be papers, maybe even a book or two published on this storm in the years ahead. But we've learned, I think, a little bit more about how these hybrid storms form. Now, we saw one about 20 years ago, this perfect storm of the book and the movie that was out in the North Atlantic, but never quite made landfall, but did a lot of damage along the coast. So we've learned a little bit more about these hybrid storms. We've learned how important the forecasting of these storms are and what goes into making these forecasts, such as available satellite data and buoy observations and aircrafts flying into these storms, as well as observations on land. But we've also learned that we need to make sure the message gets out. It's that melding of physical science and social science. And I think we've learned some lessons, and we're going to see them pay advantages in the future.
David, we have, and who's counting, but about 34 days left in this year's hurricane season. It seems to have been very quiet, at least for this part of the country. Is there a chance that there might be some big, serious system that develops before we get out of the season?
There's always a chance of a late season storm, but every week we go into November now with lessen the chances. So I doubt we'll see that kind of hybrid storm later in the season. But of course, there's a major storm starting to come across the country. It's been pretty quiet even in that regards of late. But it was a relatively inactive hurricane season in the Atlantic. All the stars didn't align. There were some factors there that early on suggested it was going to be an active, powerful season. But a little bit of dry and warm air got into all levels of the atmosphere out in the Atlantic, and it took the legs out from these storms and didn't allow them to percolate up through the atmosphere. So what formed, and we've been through the L storm, but they've been minimal hurricanes at best, short-lived events, and they've spared almost the entire Atlantic region, with the exception of some pretty severe storms along the eastern Mexican coast. At least in the Atlantic Caribbean basin, not that bad a season and not likely to get a late season surprise.
Yeah, that's a welcome relief, particularly after last year. David Robinson, thank you so much.
My pleasure.